Okay. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol neh b'dvarim.
And you need to use your magic wand and mute us.
Amen.
My all powerful, that all powerful moment. Okay. Take that. There we go. Okay. I want to deal with something really very fundamental this morning about this parsha. We're starting now the parshas of the book of Vayikra. I was recently away for Shabbos and was listening to some people talking about how exciting the parshas are in Shmos, and then how much of downers they are in Vayikra. Talking about dead animals and sprinkling blood. And I didn't want to tell them because I didn't want them to get the wrong impression of me that I thrive on that stuff. I just thought that they would think, oh boy, what's with this guy? But the truth is that I think that the Sefer Vayikra is such a rich sefer in drashos, in expositions, and in understanding, and that, as I'm going to show you this morning, and really sort of like begin the trend of thinking that there is a depth in the book of Vayikra that, like we do in Pirkei Avos, that we talk to the soul of a person. The book of Vayikra talks to the soul of a person, and that there are fundamental issues that are brought up in every twist and turn of Vayikra, in every single detail of the Korbonos, and we're going to understand the why this morning. And there is different types of Korbonos, different types of sacrifices that are presented in the Torah. One of them is a mincha. One of them is a meal offering. Now there is a little bit of a mistake that people make, and that people assume that in the future, both the Rambam and Rav Kook are of the opinion that there aren't going to be a reinstitution of sacrifices, a reinstitution of animal sacrifices. And in fact, they both never really say that, but that's for a different time. But they say that what people say in their names is that what will be reinstituted and what will be done in the temple will be meal offerings. Meal offerings was one of the type of offerings that we brought. We brought flour in different kind of ways, made into pancakes, made into griddle cakes. And the mincha, there were different minchos, there were different menachos that were offered all the time. There is a halacha, there is a Torah commandment in menachos that tells us as follows: that we can't lo ta'aseh chametz, that we can't make it from chametz, we can't make it from leaven, many of them, and also we can't call devash lo saktiru, that we can't put in any devash, any honey. So you can't sweeten it, and you can't make it into chametz. However, we're told by all korbanos, whether they're meat korbanos or whether they're flour korbanos, we are told that b'melach timlach, that you have to put salt on them. And there was a little salt lick up on the top of the ramp that when they would bring the sacrifices up to be burnt on top of the altar, they would drag them over the salt lick, and then they would offer them to God. Now, I can't imagine God ever saying, guys, that was like a great carbon, but it's a little salty. I just can't imagine that it really mattered how much salt was put on or whether salt was put on the carbon. You're burning this thing up and incinerating it. Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment. But why is it that we can't add soor and devash, and why is it that we can't add that we can add salt? Now, I hope that I have generated inside of you a very fundamental question. Is that it's so nice, Rabbi, that you're talking about a detail about korbanot, a detail about sacrifices. But what are sacrifices? Why is that such a central piece in Judaism? Why is it that if you look at your Musaf, Shmona Esrei on Shabbos, you look at the Amidah from Musaf, and it's all about korbanot. You look at it on Yontif, it's all about korbanot. Look at it on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, there is a large section of korbanot. We have a section that we say every day in davening. We pray every day that the sacrifice should be returned to us. It is a central piece of Judaism. What are sacrifices? To the modern mind, to the Pita mind, to the world, the world in tune mind, it is barbaric and an absolute waste of an animal's life. What is the necessity for korbanos in Jewish life, to the extent that we feel missing. We spoke about this yesterday when we talked about Galut, when we talked about exile, and we talked about that we're in exile until we have a reinstitution of the temple and temple service. Why is that so central to us? So in this week's Parsha, there is a Ramban, a Nachmanides commentary on the Torah in verse 9, in the first chapter, where the Ramban explains Maimonides' concept of that's behind Korbonos, and then destroys that concept and shows us what he feels and what most have adopted to be the essence of Korbonos, the essence of sacrifices. The Rambam explains that the Egyptians and the Chaldeans, who were nations that we were hanging around with, they worshipped cattle and they worshipped flock. And the Egyptians, we know that they worshipped the lamb. The Chaldeans, they worshipped a demon that looked like a goat. And these were their gods. Lambs, goats. That's why, if you remember, next Shabbos, this Shabbos is functional Shabbos HaGadol in the sense that any Rav who's giving a Shabbos HaGadol drasha usually gives it on this Shabbos. But the actual Shabbat HaGadol, that's going to be next Shabbos, Shabbos for Pesach. And why is it called Shabbat HaGadol, the Great Shabbos? So many people, usually congregants, like to quip that because the rabbi gives a long drasha and therefore it's called Shabbat HaGadol, shkoyach. But that's not the reason. The reason that it's called Shabbat HaGadol is because on that Shabbos a miracle happened. It wasn't really on Shabbos. It doesn't make a difference, but we commemorated on that Shabbos. I'm not going into why right now. We commemorated on that Shabbos before Pesach because 4 days before we took the carbon Pesach, we had to take the carbon, tie it to our beds, make sure that it was blemish free, and not one Egyptian said a word. We didn't take what they sacrificed to their gods. We took their God himself. We took the lamb and the sheep and the goat. We tied it to the bedpost. As soon as they saw us tying it to the bedpost, they must have thought, oh, this is not going to end up very good. And they said nothing to us. They accepted, if this is what the Jews are doing, this is what the Jews are doing. And that was an incredible miracle for the beginning of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the beginning of the Exodus of Egypt. So the Rambam explains that the Chaldeans and the Egyptians worshipped goats. The Indians, this is the Rambam talking, Maimonides, the Indians worshipped cows, and none of these cultures would eat their gods. And therefore, God commanded us to sacrifice sheep and goats and cattle to knock out the thoughts from these nations, these thoughts that insidiously entered into the Jewish psyche that they are gods. And we started to look at them as if they were gods. I'm sure there were the liberals amongst us that said, well, they think they're gods, even though we know it's nonsense, but if they think they're gods, why do we want to disturb them? Not only are they not gods, God wanted us to understand, but rather they are at best, they are at best vehicles for atonements to the ultimate God. Slaughter them, and we slaughter them and offer them to our God. So it disavows them of the notion that this is a God, and it disavows us of the notion that this is a God. They thought that these animals were too holy to slaughter. God commanded them to be slaughtered for atonement, and in this way counteract this nonsensical belief. The Rambam holds fundamentally that the purpose of Korbonos is to counteract the effects of idolatry and pagan worship. Comes along the Ramban, Nachmanides, and he says to the Rambam, what are you talking about? He uses very strong language. He says, you're reducing the reason of Korbonos to an antidote to avodah zarah, to idolatry. That is a degradation to God and to his Torah. In God's Torah, it says, Lechem ishe reach l'reach nichoach, that this is like the bread of fire to God. It's a reach nichoach, it's a beautiful smell. There is something intrinsically good about Korbonos. It can't just be an antidote to something horrific, an antidote to idolatry. And says the Ramban, that the truth is, sacrifices to God were long before there were pagans and long before there were pagan rituals. Adam, Noah, God looked at Noah's sacrifice and God said, this is a reach nichoach. This is, I smell the beautiful smell of your carbon. That's not an antidote to idolatry, an antidote to sacrifice and slaughtering to other gods. When Bilam brought sacrifices, Bilam, the prophet to the world, when Bilam brought sacrifices, Bilam wasn't bringing sacrifices as an antidote to idolatry. Bilam was bringing sacrifices to God himself. So says the Ramban to the Rambam, what are you talking about? And then he goes in for the kill. He says that this is there is something intrinsic in sacrifices. It's giving sacrifice to God is a kavod. It's an honor. Oh, he says like this. He says, and you know what's going to happen? This is not an antidote because they're going to look at it and say, granted, we can't kill our gods, but if you're taking our gods and you're using that to atone, you're using that to cleanse yourself, that's a covet to our God. This is not a degradation to our God. So it's not going to help knock out this ridiculous thought from the nations or from the Jews, because ultimately their nations are going to see this not as a degradation, but going to see this as a kavod. And it says in the Torah, Karbani lachmi liishai reach nichochi. Again, he brings up the issue of reach nichoch, that it's something that is beautiful. It's not possible that there be no benefit and purpose to sacrifices other than combating idolatry, and yet God would call it a reach nichoch, a beautiful smell. Says the Ramban, that's not what sacrifices are. Says the Ramban, you want to know what sacrifices are? Everything we do is from thought, speech, or action. I'm going to say this very quickly. If you look at the 10 Commandments, what's the first commandment of the 10 Commandments? I'm the Lord your God. Believe in me, thoughts. Second commandment, have no other gods before me, thoughts. Third commandment, don't take my name in vain, words. Fourth commandment, Shabbat. Fifth commandment, parents. Now we're into actions. Kill, steal. Don't kill, don't steal. Sorry. Don't kill, don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Those are all thoughts. Don't give false testimony. Words. Don't be jealous. Those are feelings. We start off with thoughts. We move from thoughts to words, from words to actions, actions to words, words to thoughts. That's the 10 Commandments. That's the cycle of the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments are speaking to three things: to the thoughts, to the actions, and to the words of the human being. Because everything we do is centered around purifying our thoughts, purifying our words, purifying our actions. When we sin through our words. We sin through our thoughts, and we sin through our actions. And therefore, when we atone for that, when we clean that, when we fix that, so then we need to do it through our thoughts and through our words and through our actions. We take our hands and we put it on the head of an animal. It's called smicha. We push down on the head of the animal, as if to say that the actions that we had done for naught are now being done for something important. We then say vidui. We say the confessional. We take our words that we use to hurt and to harm and to desecrate, and we use them now to elevate and sanctify. And then we burn the organs of the animal, the organs of thought, the organs of machshava. We burn the legs and the hands, which are the organs of action. We toss the blood, which is the soul, the dam hu hanefesh. And that as we're doing this, we recognize that really this is me. The hands of that behemoth, those are my hands. My nefesh behemi, my lowest part of me, the lowest functioning part of me, which is a part of my soul. It's a part of who I am, but nevertheless, it's the lowest part. It's where sin can live, My nefesh behemi has caused me to do this, and therefore I need to sacrifice. I need to obliterate. I need to get rid of my nefesh behemi. And when I slaughter that animal, and I take the blood and the legs and the innards and the kishkas and the meat of that animal and I offer it up as a burnt offering on top of the altar, I recognize that that really should be me. And if it wasn't for the chesed of God, who takes a truma, who takes a ransom in place of me, the animal's blood would be my blood. And the animal's limbs, those are my limbs. And if that's the case, so then I am putting myself on that altar and offering myself up in front of God. That's when I sinned. And when something beautiful happened to me, I want to give myself over to God completely. God, thank you for letting that happen to me. And I take an animal that again represents me. And I offer that animal, I offer my limbs, I offer my innards, I offer my flesh, I offer my heart, I offer my neshama, I offer my soul. And that's what sacrifices are. Because they are moshech es alev, they pull our hearts back into the right direction and focus our thinking and to realize that we are sacrificing ourselves, we are offering ourselves and binding ourselves to God. That's why they're so central in our davening. Because v'nishlama para sifosenu, the verse says, that now we can say words that are like sacrifices. If we put our soul into the words that we say, it's as if we are offering ourselves up in front of God. God tells us that even though we don't have the sacrificial system anymore, even though we don't have the temple, but we still have our words. And when we use our words correctly, so then our words become our offering, our words become our symbolic animal offering, and we are taking ourselves and offering it and binding in front of God. Which is why we spend so much time on sacrifices, why we pray for them and pine away for them. Because as good as davening is, sacrifices are better. Because davening, the amount of imagination you have to have in order to be able to present yourself in front of God is much greater than the amount of imagination that you need to have and what you need to engender in yourself and to conjure up when you're standing in the temple courtyard and your animal is being sacrificed on top of the altar. That's why this is such a critical step in Judaism, in Torah. It's the reason why if you look at your davening, you will see in your davening that from the beginning of davening until the end of davening, you are walking through the floor plan of the temple. You're going from the women's courtyard up the 15 steps with the morning blessings through the courtyard, around the altar, into the chamber, and then eventually into the inner chamber, into the Kodesh Kadoshim, where you stand in your Shemona Esrei in front of God. Every single part of the layout of the temple, the way that our Shemona Esrei is structured. One day I'll show you this. When our Shemona Esrei, the way our Shemona Esrei is structured, we are walking around the altar, the Mizbeach, and sprinkling the blood like the Kohen did every day in the Korban Tamid, in the daily sacrifice. Because this act of Korbonos, as the Ramban explains, was not just to put a finger in the eye of idolatry. It was to elevate the human being and make him recognize that he is serving God and that he is connected to him and that he needs to offer himself up in connection and in closeness to God. What does the word korban mean? Korban, we translate sacrifice. It means an act of closeness. Karov, something close, because that's what we're trying to do, to literally bind ourselves and bring ourselves closer to God. That's the reason why the Torah tells us that there can be no chametz and there can be no dvash. Because, first of all, what the Torah is telling me is that a korban can't be just an artificial mimicking of others. It has to be a natural expression of our true inner selves. It has to be a reach nichoach, a beautiful smell to God. For our relationship to God to be meaningful, it has to be genuine. It has to be coming from an internal place, from a real place. The desire to grow is critical, but it has to be authentic. And there's a large part of our religious lives that are objective, but there's also a large part of our lives that are subjective, not mandated by strict halacha, but rather by what we put into it. You can't put things in. You can't put something into what you're doing that is merely just an additive. That's merely just something that is foreign. You take leaven, you take honey. Those are foreign things. So sure, it's going to beef up your sacrifice. Sure, it's going to make the sacrifice taste sweet. But it's not bringing out the best of the sacrifice. All it's doing is it's giving it a different taste. It's altering its taste. That's not called putting something into what you do. That's not called being authentic. That's taking something from the outside and trying to add it in. It's taking somebody else's culture, somebody else's values, somebody else's worship, and putting that into our worship, which, as beautiful as that might make it, is only external and it has not enhanced the connection. All it's done is altered the connection. Rather, the improvement has to come through salt. The reason why God told us salt has to be on every carbon is because he was telling us that every act of closeness that you want to achieve with me needs to be mixed with salt. Because what is salt? Salt is a flavor enhancer, not a flavor masker. It brings out, used in the proper measure, it brings out the flavor of the food. It doesn't mask the flavor of the food. It only enhances it. It doesn't change it. And this then becomes the model of our spirituality. You can't improve it artificially. It can't be improved by changing it. It can only be improved by putting yourself into it and enhancing its performance and enhancing its value and its meaning. The reason why sacrifices are so critical to us is because they are us. They are our avodas Hashem. They are our paradigm, our example, our guide for how we're meant to serve God. Every pasuk in this week's parsha, from the way that we grab the animal, the way that we cut the animal, the way that we prepare the animal, the way we clean the animal, are all things that we need to do inside of us in order to be able to offer it to God. No, it doesn't mean that we didn't do sacrifices, but the sacrifices were the external action that we did that was meant to be the model of our insides. Next week, Thursday night, we're about to embark on Bedikas Chametz. It's a fool that thinks that Bedikas Chametz is merely just a check in your house for Chametz. Bedikas Chametz is merely just a physical action that we do that is a manifestation of what's going on and meant to be going on inside of us. When we check every crack and crevice in our homes, we're meant to be checking every crack and crevice inside of ourselves. Am I pure and ready to offer myself up to God as a Korban Pesach, as a sacrifice, a paschal lamb? Am I ready to attach myself to God as a sacrifice is a vehicle for attachment between me and God? Every single thing we do in the physical world is meant to be a mirror and an inspiration and a guide for us as to what we should be doing inside of us. I always mention at my Seder, when you eat matzah, don't eat it with your teeth and your throat. Eat it with your heart. Matzah is meant to inspire us with a feeling, not merely just to do an action, but that there's something inside of us that needs to be moved during matzah. When we eat maror, we're not just remembering the slaves in Egypt, they suffered so much, but that there is a merirus that we have to come to terms with, a bitterness that we have to come to terms with inside of ourselves. and how to remove that, and how to deal with that, how to incorporate that in our service of God. Everything we do, we drink 4 cups of wine. The 4 cups of wine are meant to recognize that we're not drinking just 4 cups of wine, but there were 4 stages to our redemption. And that what we're experiencing externally, that elevation that we experience from one cup to the next, is something that we need to be experiencing internally. Every mitzvah that God gave us outside is meant to inspire us to a feeling on the inside. From Shabbos to kashrus, to davening, to tefillin, mezuzah, these are not mere symbols, but these are external activities that are meant to be mirrored inside of my soul. That's the concept of Korbonos. That's why this is every turn and twist is so critical to our existence. Okay, my thoughts. If you want to see the Ramban inside, it's verse 9. If you have an English Ramban or Hebrew Ramban, if you can handle it, but there is in the Nachmanides commentary, there is one of them has Art Scroll has an English Ramban, and in verse 9, chapter 1, the Ramban says it very, very beautifully. Okay. Everybody should have an amazing Shabbos. I would like to speak a little bit about Pesach. And again, just make that commercial that those 2 podcasts, 1 and 2, we've gotten such incredible responses to those two podcasts. It's really touched a lot of people. And so I encourage you to, if you can get your hands on them, to check them out. And I will try not to say the same things, but speak about something different about Pesach on Sunday morning, and then that'll be our last class for Pesach break.
Okay, Rabbi, I just want to wish everybody a Hag Pesach Sameach, Hag Kasher Pesach Sameach. We're traveling to the U.S. On Sunday for 3 weeks.
Amazing.
So I won't see you for 3 weeks.
Amazing. Have a wonderful, amazing trip. Wow.
Thank you.
That's beautiful. Are you going to be in the West Coast?
No, East Coast. That's
Just
where
on
our
the East
children
Coast.
are. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. Amazing shiur. Wow.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Have a beautiful Shabbos.
Thank you. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Chag Sameach.
Shabbat Shalom.
And that too.